Hey, all right. Today we have Lynette Dumalag, Senior Vice President at JLL's Minneapolis office. Lynette was recently recognized for a notable nonprofit board service for her work as the board chair at the Urban Land Institute of Minnesota. Hey, Lynette, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
First, can you just tell me a bit about what you do at JLL? What is your work there?
Sure. Yeah. So I am a senior vice president at JLL. My role here is I'm a broker. So what I do is I help users of real estate find space or dispose of space. So it might be office space, it might be maker space, it might be anything related to organization and business. And specifically, I work with clients that are in the healthcare field, in nonprofit, and in government as well.
Cool. And you've been in the board chair role at ULI Minnesota for just a few months now, but you've been an officer for the organization for even longer. Tell me about what that work is like and kind of what you hope to accomplish in this position as the board chair.
Sure. So I will preface this with ULI, Urban Land Institute Minnesota, is a global organization. And how we're organized is that every single area has their own district council. So while we kind of figure out how we manage the organization here locally, we still are kind of tied to the national arm of ULI National. So I've been on the board a few years. I was invited to join a while ago. And when I first joined this industry, I thought of ULI as very like, these are where really smart people are thinking and doing and talking about deals and things that I, as a young person joining industry, I just had no idea and didn't really think that room was for me. I was someone that was working on market reports. I was someone that was helping kind of the day-to-day kind of all the little things you need to do to make a deal happen. But that room was for people who were like movers and shakers. So I'll start there. And then I had a very good friend who said, I've seen you do other things in this area, in the Twin Cities, and I've seen your leadership grow. I really think you should consider joining ULI Minnesota and consider, eventually joining the board. So then I was invited to join the board a few years back. And from that, and this was a time of change for the organization. We had an executive director who had announced her retirement, and she has then moved on and done really great things. And we hired a new executive director, Stephanie Brown. And so there is some really great energy around what we get to do as an organization. ULI was formed initially under this construct. Now we're going to be seeing what we can do, especially after the wake of George Floyd's murder and all of the things that now communities are saying, what can we do differently to make sure that some of this civil unrest that we've experienced, some of this tension doesn't happen again, and recognizing that real estate and placemaking itself has a role in that.
Yeah. And you had written a letter when you were an incoming chair, right? That mentioned some of those histories related to racial covenants, redlining. What do you think is ULI's significance in kind of bringing this change forward?
Sure. So I always think, well, one, informing and educating our members and our greater community about the things that we maybe didn't have a hand in. Like I wasn't alive making these decisions in the 30s and 40s, but maybe my mentor might have had a hand in that. So it's really taking a look at where some of these things occurred in our community. So namely racial covenants, and I'll take St. Louis Park as the city where I live in as an example. There are places in our city that had restricted deed covenants that were specific. You cannot live here if you are a person that is non-white. Then there's some that even go more specific if you are a Black individual, or even if you're of Chinese descent. So that is the area of where I live. And so when you think about real estate and when you think about all the things that we make as a decision, this is where a company wants to go because this is the economic base is here, because this is the demographic that we're choosing. So when I think about ULI and I think about kind of the things that we've done as an industry, we always look back to history and we always say, well, these are the people that live here now, or this is the workforce that we have now. This is what we would like to have. We would like to locate our organization here because of whatever reason. Maybe you want to enter the market because you see that demographic buying your product, or maybe that demographic not wanting your product. So then you make a different decision. And so you can see areas in our city where it's pretty apparent, 3 generations later. So as ULI, as chair of ULI, and some of the things and some of the work that I've done within JLL, some of the nonprofits that I've worked with, some of them have been asking themselves that question as well. So I've been working with some nonprofits here locally that say, we want to be in this area because we are here to serve the community. And we want to reflect the values of this organization and what it brings.
Yeah. You have a very extensive resume. I saw that do you currently serve on the board of Catholic Charities and have previously served on Aon's board, right?
Correct. Yeah.
What do you think are some, affordable housing is kind of an issue that I write about regularly, that we talk about a lot. What do you think are some unique or key solutions for addressing the affordable housing crisis? And, what are you seeing people bring forward?
Yeah, so we are seeing, affordable housing, there's a lack of affordable housing. You have single digit vacancy, and those are usually because people are moving in and out. And so there's a lot of things in our area where people get to be creative. So we'll talk about kind of real estate and land use. So we also have in our community, when a developer comes to town, there is a process that you go through. You go through planning, and then you go through council and approval. Sometimes you might not have advocates that want to be in that space and speak about changes that are happening in their neighborhood, and that's a normal reaction. You bought into this neighborhood. You have it. There's a reason you did, because you haven't set expectations, and then all of a sudden there might be a housing developer coming into town or coming into your block, and then it will materially change how you feel about your neighborhood. So there's the land use part. Then there's the actual financing part, where you might have private capital is always faster to deploy, and it's always about site control. So you might have people that are able to put a deal together quicker than if you were trying to do affordable housing. And then you have the financing piece, which is the tax credits kind of allocations. And those are super competitive. And if that is how an organization does deals, it'll take time. So, and that's always tied to your income, your area median income, where you sit relative to the area median income. And that's how deals get financed. But then you might have to sit on a list to make sure that you get your housing. So yeah, and there's also this occurrence of naturally occurring affordable housing. When I was on Aon's board, that was a very aggressive acquisition kind of mode, because all of the tax credit properties that were constructed under and then now are able to be market rate, those are things that communities should be mindful of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So speaking of that extensive resume, you've done work in tenant representation. You currently are a city council member in St. Louis Park. Not to mention the roles that we've already discussed. How do these things fit together? How do these roles inform each other? How does your work at JLL or ULI inform your work as a council member, or vice versa?
Oh, that's such a big question.
I know.
D, all of the above.
Right.
So, we can talk about, so there's work that I've done, whether it's nonprofit, so being on the board of Aon, Catholic Charities, ULI. Then there's the work that I've done relative to negotiating with a landlord, advocating for my client, making sure that the space that they choose to call their home and offices is suitable for what they need. And then there's a lived experience. So if I can delve a little bit into the lived experience bit. So I am a first generation, I think it's Filipinx, or I'm a Filipino American, but I've been told it's Filipinx. And my parents immigrated here in the early 70s. And so when my mother and father first came to this country, they immediately, the jobs that they had in the Philippines, the experience that they had in the Philippines, and they were here in their late 20s, were no longer applicable. Their college degrees were not quite, I think they were not recognized, if I'm using the right term, as like, yep, it's a legitimate college degree. And so you kind of had to start, they had work experience, but they had to start again. So my dad was, he was a janitor in St. Louis Park City Hall. So he was cleaning that building that I now serve and go every week to make decisions. And he had a second job at Nordic Ware. So he was working on the line making bundt pans in our city. And then my mother originally was a teacher, and then she decided, I'm going to give an analyst, or what is this thing called, computer programming. And so she went to control data and was and learned that and built a career after that. But when I say lived experience, the first housing they looked at after they were living with my aunt and uncle, because they were very kind and generous to let them live there for a few months while they got settled. My family had experienced some discrimination going into some housing. So there was one housing that wasn't quite up to par and didn't seem very safe to live in. And then there was another housing that the landlord said, I don't think you can afford it, so I'm not going to give you an application. So those, I say that story because it also informs how I might advocate for people when I'm on council. It might be advocating when I'm looking at programs or initiatives that a nonprofit might have, because it's impacting this community. And the family has to make decisions based on what's available to them. And then also too, like, it also impacts how, how we get to make decisions on council. So, so these kind of all, like, they all intersect, and they all kind of inform one another.
Yeah. It feels like it would be easy for you to do just one or two of these things, but you've done all of these things. Why do you take on all these things? What do you like? What do you like about this work? What is,
I feel like you've been talking to my husband. Maybe you have. Well, there's and I've admittedly, I've been better at saying no to things. So I've gotten better at doing that. But also too, I look at as, when you have these leadership roles for the time being, you learn as much as you can, contribute as much as you can, and then you hopefully make sure, like, hopefully you surround yourself with people, the next generation or next leadership, and then they can make decisions moving forward. So I've always been a big believer in learn as much as you can, contribute as much as you can, and then you move on to the next thing. I've always, I've jokingly said to people that have been in leadership positions that if you are the older person in the room who is always like, we've tried that before, and you never want to find yourself in that position, you should probably move on and let others lead. But I obviously, I love this community so much, and I do what I can with the time that I have, and hopefully people want to take up after I've maybe served in some positions, because leadership should be something that's shared. I've always believed that, and that you should allow for others to have that.
Yeah. Cool. Tell me about this this recognition you got for nonprofit service. What does it mean to you, and just tell me about it.
Well, so yeah, Twin Cities Business, they have a list of like, hey, who wants to be nominated? And actually I was quite surprised. It's like, well, we'll see. And I'll share a bit of a story. I bought a couple of issues, making a plug for that magazine, with another magazine podcast. And I went into the bookstore and I got to buy this couple of issues for my family, including my own. And so my son, who is with us, with me. It was just me and him. I think we were going to grab a cookie at the nearby bakery as well. But I'm like, we got to buy this. And so I open it. I'm like, this is the right one, right? And so I saw my face in there, and then my son was like, "That's you, Mama." And so when I look at all of the people that I was, in kind of in that same recognition, I feel really honored that I'm in a group as like highly distinguished as some of the folks that have been highlighted. So it means a lot. And I don't do board service. I'm as I mentioned before, I'm a bit more discerning on what I say yes to. So this feels really good.
Yeah. Awesome. Lynette, I'm not sure that I have any other questions. Was there anything that you wanted to add about your work, what you hope to see from the future, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, something that I've been kind of noodling is that, as communities are saying and asking their leaders, like how can we change space? How can we change space for communities? And so whether it's, JLL putting a deal together and, bringing an employer or an organization into a community, or like, how do you do public engagement well? And so are you creating spaces for community or with community inputs, and what does that look like? Versus like, we're going to create this building, this asset. We're only looking at it as an asset. And we're only looking at it as from the investor's point of view, and then a return. So I do think that there's some like nice sweet spot balance. And that's what I hope to kind of explore as chair of ULI, because there's certainly, I think, room for people who have never had like a family experience, that I shared previously, or the developers or people in banking, they might have a different lived experience than those that have done this for generations. And so I'm excited to see what those outcomes might look like. We've spent a lot of time at ULI working on pipeline and working on board governance and restructure, because I really believe that if we make space for leaders to come through, they'll do it, and that'll just make communities better. And when you're in partnership with the community and developer, I just think the end product is remarkably different.
Yeah. Do you see that happening more?
I do. Yeah, I do think that there's opportunities to say, hey, this is what we need. And then for community to kind of vocalize that. But then it's like any negotiation. That's why we have staff to do negotiations at cities, and saying, the priority for this is X. And so I do see kind of some cities and communities looking remarkably different and better for it. There was an article in the Star Tribune about tree canopies recently, and what does it look like when you have foliage, if you have a tree, and what it does like for the climate. But my colleagues at JLL, they're leasing a building. Well, they're marketing a building, the North Loop Green, and super sustainable. Like, what does it look like when a former industrial area now is where it's livable, and what does it look like to have things like a tree or trees or any type of outdoor space that wasn't there previously.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for taking the time. It was great talking.
Great.
All right. Take care.
Okay. Oh, we were ending it. We're done. Okay.
Can
I hit leave?
That's yeah.